Welcome back to Control Alt Lead, where we talk to the people leading modern IT about what's moving in the market. This time I'm talking to Sarah Milton-Hunt, the Chief Information and Digital Officer at National Grid. Of course, most of you will know National Grid. It's been powering the UK for decades. What you might not know is right now there's a massive change program going on as the grid moves away from legacy tech and fossil fuels and into digitalization and renewables, while also dealing with the growth of power-hungry data centers. Sarah and I talked about the irony of needing those data centers to meet the needs of the energy transition, how she and her team are future-proofing the grid for the next 50 years, and what every IT leader can do to help. Enjoy. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. You've come from National Grid, so tell me a little bit about yourself and your work and your role at National Grid.
So thanks for having me. I'm the Chief Information and Digital Officer for National Grid Electricity Transmission that provides the electricity transmission network in England and Wales. Before I got into IT, I worked in a real variety of jobs, and I think that's actually served me very well from a perspective of breadth of experience. I ran a newspaper which included typesetting it. I worked in finance, so I did a real variety of things, but probably landed about far too many years ago now into moving into IT. I worked out that this was a career that I actually loved and digital, and I've always loved the opportunity to take that and actually learn about businesses and then apply it back into getting outcomes with technology. So I worked for the airports for about a decade, BAA when we had World Duty Free, Heathrow Express. So I like broad businesses in that sense. I then went and did another decade of consulting for Hewlett Packard. So I got the opportunity to touch on a number of industries. So did with FMCG, I did some finance, very peripheral of energy. I then moved into doing transformation for NTT in EMEA. So did big data center moves, fundamental transformation for NTT in EMEA. I'd been, I was the CIO for P&O Ferries, again, another broad business because it was part of the DP World Group and in end-to-end logistics, so got to be broad there. Also got the opportunity to sell the company. It was great M&A experience. Did some of the M&A and BAA as well when we divested, and then got the opportunity to come to National Grid. And the main thing that really drove me here was the opportunity to play a remarkably small part in a fantastic thing that we needed to do on a national and global basis.
Yeah, so you've got huge amounts of experience at very, very large companies, but largely private sector. How is it different working at National Grid?
I think that the nature of a regulated industry is different in that sense. BAA had a regulated constraint around it as well, but it was a very different way that it manifested in the organisation. I don't think it's significantly different. I suppose the difference is the focus on the consumer value and ensuring that we're able to articulate that we're making the right decisions in a macro perspective that serve the consumer, which isn't a difficult thing to do and is very much the right thing to do. But it then goes through the regulatory constructs to make sure that we have got the rigor we need around it. So I would say that's the real fundamental difference for me.
Okay. So now you work at National Grid. The supergrid, of course, has been active for, I think, 70 years last year. So big legacy system. What part does modern IT play in the grid?
A huge part, because actually we are hitting the need to transform our network. And if you're very correct, the supergrid's 70 years old, I think it was last year. We are still getting the benefits of some awesome engineering from the 1950s, where people thought in a much bigger context to what we needed to do, and making sure that it was fit for future. And we're on that tipping point again, where we need to make the same big thinking and big ideas in actually how we're going to do that for the energy transition. So I think that's one of the things that's significantly changed in that sense. From how does digital contribute to that? IT-OT convergence of concepts of convergence of IT and OT. So in electricity, you have what's called protection and control. We're dealing with lots of high volume electricity. We need to make sure that we maintain safety at all cases. And that's becoming more and more digital with that would normally be analog systems that would put breakers in and it would be controlled by relays, etc. You're now in a space I'm not familiar with. But actually, that's now been shifted to a protocol called 61850. It's been around for a while now, but is fundamentally more pervasive across the industry. And that's around digitizing how we do that. So we've taken what would be like 10, 20 racks of something, and we can now put that virtually onto a set of computers and put that logic into a digital capability with the same timescales that you need to respond to maintain safety. So that's one example of where we're converging to digital and the IT/OT convergence. And I truly believe with the scale of what we need to do to meet the energy transition, we can't do what we've always done just more efficiently or with more people. We fundamentally need to transform to do that, and digital's key to that transformation.
Okay, well, you talked there about the energy transition. Let's talk about that. We're seeing escalating, from an IT perspective, escalating energy demand from data centers. Then there's, of course, the switch to renewables. What kind of challenges is that giving to the grid?
And from our perspective, we're forecasting in the next 10 years 6 times growth in the data center consumption. So it's going from being 1% of the energy pool and load to being 6% in about 10 years' time. It's a double-edged sword, because actually the reality is to do the energy transition and meet net zero, we need to digitize, but to digitize means we need more data centers. So, we very much advocate connecting people to the grid as per the need. I think it's a community challenge around how do we do that sustainably. It starts with the data center owners, and you see the likes of Microsoft, AWS making some very bold statements about being carbon neutral. Microsoft are even talking about offsetting the carbon they've had for their entire existence, and they take accountability down to the Xbox, which sits in all of our homes. So it starts there. But it's a requirement that we then build it into everything we do and think about sustainability by design. So if I don't need something to be on overnight, I need to build it in an elastic compute environment, and I need to turn it off overnight. Or if it's not always needed and it's suitable that there's a lag in the response time, then I just have it in a down state. Somebody clicks, it stands up. And that's the benefit of modern computing and concepts that allows us to do that. But that's about intentionally designing with sustainability in mind.
Okay, so how then can IT leaders help designing with sustainability in mind? If that's something that you're paying so much attention to, it would make sense for the people who are running all the demand to pay attention to it as well.
Yeah, as I say, I think it's a real community consideration, and that's the only way that we're going to get to the outcomes that we need. And we need to support digitization. You need to support things like if you look at blockchain is a high consumer of compute, but actually when you look at the value of blockchain in securing supply chains and ensuring that we know the entire history of and ownership and audit trail of things, it's a brilliant transformation from a digitization perspective. But you're right, everybody needs to start bringing those pieces into their thinking. And I think that if you look at most organizations have a green agenda on their corporate responsibilities these days, and they just need to make sure it's as pervasive back into not creating the problem at the same time as trying to solve the problem as much as possible.
Sure. Okay, so we've talked then a little bit about the sustainability side of the grid and what IT leaders can do. So should we dig into the specifics there? Why and how are you future-proofing the grid for this big energy transition and the high demand from data centers?
So there's some great work that we're doing, and that looks at that. As I say, we are at the precipice of needing to do that big leap that people did in the 1950s that sustained us to this point. We need to think about it in the whole, and we need to work across the industry about what are the next steps to do that in. So that's about designing the physical electricity network. How are we supporting that from a digital perspective? As I say, we are doing that convergence. We are digitizing. We're talking about digital substations, intelligent networks. We're talking about, we're going to be putting intelligence on our networks, because actually the sheer scale of what's about to grow starts going beyond the human capacity to entirely control. So it needs to be co-piloted and supported with that artificial intelligence. But that gives us options in there as well as to actually how you tune with those sustainability concepts in mind as well.
I'm glad you mentioned artificial intelligence there, because it's the big news of the year, the last couple of years, really. There's very clear interest in AI in the energy sector. I remember reading something about some energy suppliers like Shell using the tech to improve efficiency. How are you using AI at National Grid?
I think we're using AI in the way that most organizations are with regards to if you're subscribing to any form of software as a service, most people have baked some AI into it these days, so that it helps you get better at predictive, looks at your data a bit better in that sense. How are we actively using it around the actual job that we're doing versus kind of getting it in a secondary manner? We are looking at exactly what I just talked about, which is actually how do we put some of our control criteria into artificial intelligence that helps us look for logic to be able to control and manage the network and maintain the reliability and resilience, especially as we go through this change period. Because actually, if you have the same static network, it's a lot easier to manage than actually if you have a critical network that's actually going through a greater volume of change. So we are looking at building those algorithms there. We're looking at it in all the spaces you would expect us to in large language models, with regards to looking at, there's large volumes of regulatory documents, so we'll look at those things. There are a number of use cases that it just kind of comes to large language models of manuals for equipment as well. Actually, how do you use those in being able to ask questions, support training? Because one of the things we do need to do as we build the Great Grid Upgrade, which is what we reference, and how we talk about the work that we've got to do to build the next generation of the super grid, is actually we don't have enough skilled people to do it. And AI, mixed reality are all brilliant ways to help us expedite that skills onboarding that we need to have, which traditionally has taken a lot longer, that we need to bridge the gap to.
Okay, well, I was going to ask you if you were using generative AI to sort of sum up these training documents and things, but you've answered me. It sounds like you are, which is brilliant.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, the other thing, generative AI, when you look at the likes of, we are an active user of Copilot from Microsoft in that sense. And I'll talk about it personally. It's a great way to summarize a meeting, to look at some of the sentiment in things and actually just fix your day-to-day productivity as well as going beyond that.
Okay, and is it proving worth the investment? Is it accurate? Is it adding value to the business?
Yes, I think it's adding value, particularly from a productivity perspective at this point in time. I think that with AI, there's really, really critical that you have good data foundations. And we've got some ways to go in ensuring that we've got enough of those good data foundations. So it's only as good as the sum of its parts in some senses for me, AI, because if you put garbage in, garbage comes out. If you train it against madness, you get madness. Yes, we are getting value, but I'm not saying we're all the way there yet.
Okay. So what are the next steps? Not just with AI. I understand that you're sort of trying to improve the training data. What are the next steps for the grid? What does the future of IT at National Grid look like over the next 5 to 10 years?
Um, as I say, massive digitization of the analog network. I think we will be building far more. We've moved to the concept of data as products. So we're building a lot more data products. There'll be a lot more collaboration across the industry because actually there's a necessity for us to look at whole system to be able to balance and understand it. So there's great work that's being done by the system operator and looking forward in the 10 years about actually how do we do the right data sharing across us as a community of energy providers to make sure that we're taking advantage of all the data we've got, the digitization, but also to create the visibility across the whole system to make sure that we can balance it. The other thing that's probably a major change for us that the next 10 years will bring is the shift from fossil fuels to more renewable energy actually gives us less guarantee of energy. When you had a coal-fire power station, if you needed energy, you put coal, you burnt, you got energy. Whereas actually when you're reliant on wind and some of the renewables and solar, there's less certainty in actually, or there's less direct cause and effect of being able to say, I need energy, I get energy. And therefore managing that context, I think is critical in the next 10 years about how do we do that whilst connecting to those green energy sources and connecting all the needs to the grid. And I think we will see a digitization of our organization. I think you'll see a business shift of us as a whole becoming generally a more digital business. I think it's a necessity in any organization in this day and age that you will become more digitally literate, competent, and those things build into being far more of a digital organization.
You'd hope so, wouldn't you?
The aspiration, most definitely. So I'm going to stick with believing and manifesting.
Brilliant. Sarah, that's all the time we have, but thank you so much for joining me today.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Control Alt Lead. Make sure to tune in again next time when I'll be talking to Bruna Polici, CIO at law firm Linklaters, about how she's using AI to handle the legal sector's very specific needs. Please do leave a review and make sure to head over to computing.co.uk for more IT insights. See you soon.